When you think of a worker under capitalism, you probably picture someone on an assembly line, a barista pulling shots, or a teacher at a whiteboard. But Karl Marx had a much bigger idea: Gesamtarbeiter, the total or collective worker. This isn't one person. It's the whole social body of labor that produces a commodity or service. Marx argued that under modern capitalism, no single worker alone creates a finished product. Instead, the Gesamtarbeiter, from designers to cleaners, from managers to machine operators, works together as one living organism. And here's the radical part. Every single organ of that body, no matter how humble its task, is necessary for production. Without the janitor, the factory stops. Without the cashier, the coffee never reaches you. So the Gesamtarbeiter is Marx's way of saying, we produce together, we are exploited together, and we should fight together. Marx didn't start with the Gesamtarbeiter. In his early writings, he focused on the individual manual laborer, the person that physically transformed raw materials. But as he studied modern factories, he saw something new. In the Grundrisse, he began to write about general intellect, how science and cooperation become productive forces. Then, in Capital, Volume 1, Chapter 15, he fully formulated the Gesamtarbeiter. He wrote that, under machinery in a detailed division of labor, it was no longer necessary for an individual to perform manual labor directly. It was sufficient that he was an organ of the Gesamtarbeiter. This was a breakthrough. It meant a supervisor, a technician, even a cleaner, if their work was part of the capitalist production process, is a productive worker. Marx had moved from a narrow craft-based view to a social relational view of labor. To illustrate the Gesamtarbeiter concept, let's make it concrete with an example of a private, for-profit hospital. Who makes it all run? Doctors and nurses, of course, but also lab technicians and janitors that clean and sterilize rooms, cafeteria workers that feed patients, porters that move beds, receptionists that admit patients, and billing staff that process payments. Together, these workers form the Gesamtarbeiter, the collective worker. And crucially, all are employed directly by a capitalist corporation that owns the hospital. Every single one produces surplus value for that capitalist. Now imagine for a second, if all the doctors went on strike. The hospital might bring in temporary replacements, but if all the workers, the entire Gesamtarbeiter, strikes together, the hospital literally cannot function. No food, no clean rooms, no admission, no labs. This is the power of Marx's concept. The capitalist exploits every limb of the collective body, so every limb must withdraw their labor together. Successful strikes in private healthcare, from nurses to janitors, are victories of the collective worker, not just one profession. So far, we've discussed the total worker as including almost everyone from a barista to a nurse. But depending on the Marxist lens, the concept can look completely different. Take the Orthodox Marxist Leninist lens. It draws a hard line between productive labor, which creates new value, and unproductive labor, which simply handles or realizes existing value. In this view, most service workers in a deindustrialized US, including baristas, are unproductive. They don't create new wealth, they just help sell it. Now look through Cheng Enfu's New Living Labor lens. He argues education, healthcare, hospitality do create value. By reproducing labor power, suddenly, the concept of the total worker expands dramatically. Finally, the bullshit jobs lens. Anthropologist David Graeber argues that 40% of jobs are pointless. Administrative fluff, parasitic finance, unnecessary middlemen. They're organs of capital. They show up, they obey, but they produce no real value for society. This concept of the total worker is a zombie. It's moving, but it's dead inside. So the total worker concept isn't a fixed scientific fact. It's a battlefield of interpretation. Your politics determine who you see as a comrade and who you see just as a cost. Digital commodification and platform capitalism haven't made the Gesamtarbeiter obsolete. Instead, they have radically transformed it, expanding who counts as a worker, fragmenting how we work, and redefining where exploitation happens. First, commodification has expanded the Gesamtarbeiter well beyond the factory gates. In platform capitalism, the raw material is data, and data is produced by everyone who uses Facebook, Google Maps, Uber, or any of these other platforms. Scholars have identified a three-stage process of data commodification. First, platforms appropriate user interactions as use values to optimize their services. Second, that data is transformed into a secondary commodity, decoupled from its original use. Third, the ability to influence users is sold as a commodity to third parties. This means every click, every scroll, every review you leave for a restaurant is digital labor. Cheng Enfu's New Living Labor theory would likely recognize this as value creating, but many would reject it because the worker isn't producing a tangible commodity. Second, platform capitalism fragments the Gesamtarbeiter in ways that Marx would have never imagined. Platforms construct control systems using algorithmic monitoring, data monopoly, and task fragmentation that dominate labor using hidden digital technologies. This is what some call technological proletarianization. The precarious gig worker, atomized, isolated in their car or apartment, managed not by a foreman, but by an app. These platforms present themselves as neutral matchmakers, but in reality, while extracting value, they shift all of the risk onto the worker. Some might say these workers are excluded from the productive Gesamtarbeiter because their labor occurs in the sphere of circulation or unpaid user activity. But under the expansive view, they are at the front lines of modern accumulation. Third, despite fragmentation, the total worker is finding new forms of resistance. Uber drivers network on WhatsApp, Amazon warehouse workers organize across facilities, Google Maps local guides, 150 million strong at last count, are slowly realizing that their volunteer contributions generate billions in value without compensation. The digital collective worker may be invisible, atomized, and precarious, but it is not powerless. The same networks that fragment workers enable distributed solidarity. The question is no longer who is productive, but how can we organize the digital total worker? That, perhaps, is the central political question of the day.